It was September 12, 1990. In those times, way before instant messaging and Zoom calls, a little girl was looking for pen pals. Zoe was aboard a ship from England to Belgium on vacation with her parents. She was only 10 years old at the time, but was a very clever schoolgirl. She took a piece of paper and started putting some words together. She introduced herself, then wrote about how she liked ballet and playing the flute and the piano. Of course, she couldn't help but mention her two adored pets, a little hamster she called Sparkle and her fish Speckle. She also put down the address at which she could be reached in case someone was interested in writing back to her. But alas, she was at sea. Who could she send this message to? An interesting idea came to her mind. She carefully placed her letter in a plastic bottle, tightly closed the lid to protect it from the water, and threw it into the sea. The little girl's excitement faded away over the years as she didn't receive a response. Maybe the bottle got stuck somewhere. Maybe it was swallowed by some big, scary sea creature. Or maybe the water actually poked through the plastic cap and destroyed her message. Many years later, on Christmas, a letter for Zoe was received at her parents' house under her maiden name. The postage signaled that the message was from Europe. It was from a Dutch couple, Piet and Jacqueline Lateau, who had found her delicate bottle and were very considerate to write back. They pointed out that they had found the letter among the debris thrown at the shore by the sea. Zoe's letter had been stranded for a staggering 23 years at sea and traveled for more than 350 miles to reach its final destination near Rotterdam in the Netherlands. That's quite a voyage for a small plastic bottle. A story similar to that of Zoe is the strange connection between two little boys. A little German boy named Frank Uzbek was on a boat traveling to Denmark when he got the same idea as Zoe. He was 5 years old at the time he put together a message and threw it into the unknown. The year was 1987. He got his response years later when he was 29. His letter, just like the one Zoe would send a couple of years later, had been at sea for 24 years. His message was found by a boy named Daniel Korotkin while he was on a walk with his parents on the Koronian Spit near the Baltic Sea. Daniel was lucky that his father knew enough German to translate the message. The unlikely friends eventually met via video call in 2011. Not all message-in-a-bottle stories have been explained away. In 2013, a Croatian surfer came across a damaged bottle while near the Adriatic Sea. The message it contained dated back to 1985, and it was from a man named Jonathan. The sender was eager for his letter to reach a woman named Mary, and he also expressed his keenness for her to respond. Since the letter was supposedly sent from Nova Scotia, the bottle had to have traveled a mind-boggling 3,700 miles. The message went from the Atlantic Ocean, entered the Mediterranean Sea, and reached the Adriatic shores in Croatia. The identities of neither John nor Mary were ever discovered. There are also messages in a bottle with wonderful love stories to share. This was the case for Ake and Paulina Viking. When Ake, a lonely Swedish sailor, placed a letter in a bottle and threw it in the Mediterranean Sea, he had no idea the piece of paper would eventually reach his future wife. This was in the early 1950s. The bottle was found by an Italian man who was inspired enough to give it to his niece, Paulina. After a year of back-and-forth letters being exchanged, Ake and Paulina eventually met and got married. Having decided to share their story with the world, they became somewhat of a celebrity couple for the time. They even shared video footage of their wedding with the world, and their story was featured in a bunch of newspapers. This fortunate event started a movement between young people looking for love, increasing the number of messages being thrown out at sea in search of a fairy tale ending.
And now we're off to almost 5,000 years ago. Let me take you to ancient Egypt, where back in 2550 BC, guess what? The construction of the Great Pyramids of Giza started. People learned to build cathedrals and skyscrapers, but it wasn't until recently that these massive buildings appeared. It's still a mystery to even modern scientists how these pyramids were built 5,000 years ago. No wonder they are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They're also the oldest of them and the only wonder of the ancient world that still exists in the 21st century. It must have taken a lot of cooperation to build a thing that massive, even for today's metrics. But the Giza pyramids weren't the first pyramids ever. The first one, called the Step Pyramid, was built around 80 years before the first pyramid of Giza in 2630 BC for King Djoser. It wasn't meant to be extraordinary, but ended up being quite impressive. It was a pyramid of 6 stepped layers of stone. It was 204 feet high, which is as tall as a 19-story building. And it was the tallest building that existed at that time. It wasn't just a pyramid though, it was surrounded by a whole complex of buildings, including even courtyards. In ancient Egypt, people believed in the afterlife, so everyone, especially kings, wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to get ready for it. Here's why the pyramid complex was perfectly supplied with a lot of objects people used every day. The complex included a pyramid and a kind of a palace. Those buildings had many things the king loved and might need one day, like furniture, food, and gold vessels. After Djoser, building pyramids became common practice, but many pyramids weren't finished. It would usually take about 20 years to build one, but many rulers reigned way less than that. Overall, there are more than 100 pyramids. The most famous pyramids are the Great Pyramids of Giza. The first one and the biggest one was built for Pharaoh Khufu, around 2550 BC. Initially, it was 481 feet tall, which is as tall as a 40-story building. The second pyramid was built for Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khafre, around 2520 BC. It's just a bit shorter, usually standing at 471 feet high, a 39-story building. This is the pyramid with the famous statue of the Sphinx. Sphinxes have a lion's body and a human head. They were built to guard important areas. This one has the head of Pharaoh Khafre and is guarding his pyramid, facing the sunrise. The Sphinx is most well known and is one of the world's biggest and oldest statues. Originally, it had red color and did have a nose. It's still possible to see the trace of red pigment by its ears. But no one knows exactly when the nose disappeared. For some time, the Sphinx was sort of hidden underground, being covered with sand up to its shoulders. Luckily, in the early 1800s, an adventurer with a team of 160 people dug it out. The third pyramid of Giza is the smallest one, being more than twice shorter. Originally, it was 218 feet high, about the height of a 20-story building. Built in 2490 BC, it was a pyramid for Khafre's son, Menkaure. The pyramids are designed to align with the points of the compass, and their sides symbolize the rays of the sun. But back at the time, there were no compasses. Ancient Egyptians figured out the directions themselves, and with amazing precision. To align the pyramids, they used 2 constellations. Originally, the pyramids were covered in smooth white limestone and had a gold-silver top to reflect the sun. Later, the white limestone was taken from the pyramids by other kings and used for other buildings. Scientists estimated that ancient Egyptians used about 2.3 million stone blocks to build the first pyramid. Each block weighed more than 1 ton. This is the weight of a rhino. Some blocks were even bigger, being almost as heavy as an elephant. 4.5 millennia ago, there was no modern equipment to help build it. There were no machines, no wheels, and even no steel. The only metal available to them was copper. Even today, scientists aren't sure how the Egyptians managed to build the pyramids. There are no records left that would shed light on it. Some even think that Egyptians wanted to keep it as their secret and didn't even record it on purpose. Many believe that poor people and foreigners built the pyramids, but it's not true. Actually, the builders were very skilled workers, and they were fed and paid well. The archaeologists claimed that the builders lived in a nearby temporary city and were a highly organized community with a strong leader. Scientists say that around 20,000 people worked on each pyramid complex, and it took about 20 years to build each. It probably was a national project. The construction site was large in resources, and food and essentials were likely to be contributed from all parts of Egypt. Even with all that support, it remains unclear how people managed to cut, transport, and assemble those huge stones. One of the theories suggests the stones were most likely transported on boats down the Nile River. Then, there was a harder part. They had to be moved to the construction site. For that, they probably used wooden sleds. It wasn't very hard to pull them because the sand mixed with the right amount of water was pretty slick. And 10 people could move a sled even with a rock weighing 1 ton pretty easily. Finally, one last problem. The stones had to be lifted and put into place. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of the ramps system that dates back to when the pyramids were built. Most likely, the Egyptians designed a unique system to move and pull huge stone blocks, but no one knows what it looked like exactly.
20 miles south of Olympia, Washington, there are strange 8 feet tall and 30 feet wide grass mounds. They cover an area of nearly 1 square mile. These small hills are known as the Mima Mounds, and nobody knows what created them. They've been haunting the dreams of geologists for nearly 200 years. Scientists have been arguing about what exactly caused these mounds to pop up all over the place. There are such theories as earthquakes, glaciers, gas vents, clay swelling, and even termites. In 1942, geologists supposed that pocket gophers could create the mounds. In 1987, the theory was tested. Small bits of metal were pushed into the mounds and monitored with the help of a metal detector. As gophers dug their burrows, the pieces of metal were pushed uphill. A computer program analyzed those results. It turned out that many generations of gophers could indeed form the mounds. It would take them over hundreds of years. But why would they push the soil up when it takes way less energy to move it behind them? That's unclear. So far, gophers' involvement is still just a theory. Scientists used to consider the Amazon rainforest a large ecosystem that's been filled with trees for millions of years. Yet when the 16-foot-wide Amazon rings were discovered, it changed all the theories. These rings proved that the area looked very different before forests started growing here. It looked like a modern savanna. Scientists took soil samples near the lakes, and the results showed that this soil didn't come from a rainforest. It was from dry lands. It may mean that people who used to live here probably had a completely different environment from what scientists thought. Geologists are still studying the rings, and they're trying to figure out what purpose they serve. Known as the Eye of the Sahara, the Reichat structure is a 30-mile-wide ring-shaped object in the middle of the desert. Reichat was initially thought to be a meteorite impact site, but now scientists believe that it was created by the erosion of a hill or mountain. It eroded away over time, but left layers of rock rings that were once a mountain. The eye is so prominent that the astronauts on board the International Space Station can see it from up there. Antarctica is the coldest, driest, windiest place on Earth. But the strangest thing about it might be located deep under the ice. Until about 60 years ago, Antarctica was considered flatland. That all changed in 1958 when the Gamburtsev mountain range was discovered. It was hiding under 2 miles of ice. Its peaks were more than 10,000 feet tall, and the whole range stretched for 750 miles. That's 1/3 of the height of Mount Everest and about half the length of the Himalayas. No one has ever laid eyes on the Gamburtsev Mountains. The ice hides deep valleys and steep inclines. They could show what Earth looked like millions of years ago. Lake Vostok in East Antarctica was discovered in 2012 during drilling. Scientists found a freshwater lake, untouched and unfrozen, under more than 2 miles of ice. Researchers believe that undiscovered microorganisms and unique geochemical processes might exist in the lake. After all, it hasn't seen sunlight or been exposed to Earth's atmosphere for over 15 million years. But drilling into the lake is likely to ruin the ecosystem below and contaminate one of the last untouched places on the planet. There's a 350-foot anomaly in the Indian Ocean, known as the Indian Ocean Geoid Low, IOGL. It produces the largest distorting natural gravitational force in the world. Heavy mineral deposits, many deep-sea trenches, and magma reservoirs disturb the magnetic field in this area. Earth's gravity changes in different places around the planet. It allows researchers to look for patterns and figure out what's happening beneath the surface. Higher gravity fields usually means denser materials below, and vice versa. Some scientists believe that the anomaly might be a dent in the planet's mantle, that it's working its way up to the crust. The Cave of Crystals in the Mexican state of Chihuahua. These caverns are filled with amazing gypsum crystals that crisscross the entire subterranean area. The caves were discovered in 2000, when workers were draining water from a zinc mine. That's when they stumbled upon these sparkling structures. The crystals were so pure and large, around 33 feet in length, and had such sharp edges that geologists couldn't date them using conventional methods. Luckily, researchers discovered 50,000-year-old bacteria samples within one of the complex constructions. It was extremely hard to work in the caves. There, the temperatures reached 136 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity was extremely high. Scientists needed special cooling equipment to get down to the cave, even though they only made short trips. Unfortunately, the company that owned the mine reflooded the cave system, preventing any further study. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.